Dr. Elena Vasquez pulled her jacket tighter against the cold desert wind. The massive radio telescopes around her looked like giant metal flowers reaching toward the stars. She had been working at this remote observatory in Chile for 15 years, listening to sounds from space that most people would never understand. Tonight felt different somehow. Elena had learned to trust her instincts after all these years of searching the cosmos for signs of life beyond Earth. The coffee in her thermos had gone cold hours ago, but she didn't care. Something was coming through the radio waves that made her heart raced. At exactly 2:47 in the morning, the computer started acting strange. Numbers flashed across her screen that didn't match anything she had seen before. This wasn't the usual background noise from distant stars, or the steady beeping of spinning neutron stars. This was something organized, something that followed patterns. Elena grabbed her phone and called her colleague Dr. James Chen in Australia. Even though it was daytime there, she knew he would be just as excited as she was. "James, are you seeing this?" she asked breathlessly. "I've been tracking it for 6 hours." Came his voice through the static. "Elena, this isn't natural. Someone is broadcasting this signal." The next days passed in a blur of coffee, calculations, and phone calls to observatories around the world. Radio telescopes in Puerto Rico, England, and Russia all confirmed the same thing. A structured signal was coming from the direction of Proxima Centauri, the closest star system to Earth, about 4 light-years away. Teams of mathematicians and language experts worked around the clock to decode the message. What they found changed everything humanity thought it knew about being alone in the universe. The signal contained mathematical sequences that any intelligent species would recognize. Prime numbers, geometric formulas, and basic physics concepts were arranged in a way that served as a universal translator. But buried within these mathematical lessons was something far more urgent. When the full message was finally decoded, Elena stared at her computer screen in disbelief. The translation filled several pages, but the core message was terrifyingly simple. An advanced civilization living on a planet orbiting Proxima Centauri was dying. Their entire star system was under attack by something they called the Devourers. The beings sending the message described themselves as the Zephyrians. They had been a peaceful species for thousands of years, focused on art, science, and philosophy. But now their worlds were being consumed one by creatures that traveled between star systems, destroying everything in their path. "We send this message to any species capable of receiving it," the translation read. "Our libraries burn, our cities fall, and our people fade into memory. If you are out there, know that we existed. Know that we tried to preserve beauty in this universe, and know that the Devourers will not stop with us." Elena's hands trembled as she read the coordinates that followed. The Zephyrians had included the exact location of their homeworld, along with detailed star maps showing the path the Devourers had taken through their system. But it was the final part of the message that made her blood run cold. "By our calculations, the Devourers move between stars at a speed that would bring them to your system in approximately 847 of your years. If you receive this message, use the time you have been given. Prepare your defenses. Learn from our mistakes. Do not let the silence that follows us consume you as well." The message ended with something unexpected, along with the warning and the star charts. The Zephyrians had included what could only be described as their entire cultural heritage. Music that had never been heard by human ears. Mathematical proofs that pushed the boundaries of human understanding. And stories of their civilization that spanned millennia. Elena realized she was crying. Somewhere, 4 years ago, an entire species had broadcast their final goodbye into the darkness of space, hoping that someone, somewhere, would remember them. The signal had traveled across the vast emptiness between stars at the speed of light, carrying the last words of a dying civilization. But there was something else in the message that gave her hope. The Zephyrians mentioned that they had sent similar signals to other star systems, and some had responded. Other intelligent species existed out there, scattered across the galaxy. Some had even tried to help, though apparently none had arrived in time to save the Zephyrians. As Elena sat in the Chilean desert, surrounded by the instruments that had just made humanity's first contact with alien intelligence. She faced a terrible truth. Earth now knew it wasn't alone in the universe, but it had also learned that something was coming for them, something that had already destroyed who knows how many other worlds. The question that would haunt her for years to come was simple. What do you do when you receive a distress call from across the stars, knowing that by the time you hear it, everyone who sent it is probably already gone? Over the following weeks, as news of the discovery spread through classified government channels, Elena found herself at the center of humanity's first real glimpse into a universe far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The romantic dream of peaceful first contact had been replaced by the stark reality of cosmic predators and dying civilizations. But Elena was determined that this wouldn't be the end of the story. Somehow, humanity had to find a way to respond to that desperate message from across the void. The Zephyrians had given them 847 years to prepare, and Elena was going to make sure those years weren't wasted. She looked up at the stars one more time before heading inside. Somewhere out there, in the darkness between worlds, something was coming for Earth. But for the first time in human history, they knew it was coming. And that, Elena thought, might just make all the difference. The secret couldn't stay hidden for long. Within 3 weeks of Elena's discovery, every major government on Earth knew about the Proxima signal. The news traveled through encrypted channels, from observatory directors to science ministers, from intelligence agencies to world leaders. But the general public remained completely unaware that humanity had just learned. It wasn't alone in the universe. President after president, prime minister after prime minister, all received the same shocking briefing. An alien civilization had sent Earth a warning about creatures that destroyed entire worlds. And these destroyers were heading toward our solar system. The timeline was long by human standards, but terrifyingly short in cosmic terms. Emergency meetings began happening in conference rooms that most people didn't even know existed. The United Nations building in New York became a hub of activity, as representatives from every nation tried to figure out what to do with this information. Some wanted to tell the world immediately. Others insisted it would cause global panic. General Patricia Hayes found herself in charge of something that had never existed before. The newly created Interstellar Defense Initiative sounded impressive, but she was honest about what they were facing. During one particularly tense meeting with world leaders, she laid out the brutal facts. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, looking round the room at faces that showed a mixture of fear and disbelief, "we need to be realistic about our situation. We barely have the technology to send people to Mars and bring them back safely. Our most advanced spacecraft move at speeds that would take tens of thousands of years to reach the nearest star." Dr. Chen, who had flown in from Australia specifically for these meetings, pulled up holographic displays showing Earth's current capabilities, compared to what the Zephyrian message suggested was needed for interstellar travel. Every civilization that responded to previous distress calls, he explained, had technology that was centuries ahead of where we are now. They had unified their entire planets under single governments. They had solved problems like poverty, disease, and resource scarcity. Most importantly, they could travel between stars in reasonable amounts of time. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Here was humanity, still fighting wars over oil and water, still struggling to agree on basic things like climate change. And now they were supposed to prepare for a threat that had destroyed civilizations far more advanced than theirs. Some nations immediately began planning evacuation scenarios. If they couldn't defend Earth, maybe they could at least save some of humanity by spreading to other planets. Mars colonization programs that had been moving slowly suddenly received unlimited funding. Deep space exploration missions were fast-tracked. With the kind of urgency usually reserved for wartime, other countries took a different approach. If they only had 847 years, they would use every single one of them to advance human technology as quickly as possible. Research programs into fusion, power, artificial intelligence, and space propulsion received budgets that dwarfed anything in human history. The space agencies of the world began working together in ways they never had before. But Elena had a different idea, one that seemed crazy to almost everyone who heard it. She had spent months studying not just the Zephyrian warning message, but all the cultural information they had included. She had listened to their music, studied their art, and read their philosophical writings with the help of computer translation programs. "I think we're looking at this wrong," she told the assembled scientists and military leaders during one late-night session. Every other species that received these distress calls responded the same way. They sent advanced technology, organized fleets, military assistance, and every single one of them failed. "What are you suggesting?" General Hayes asked. Elena took a deep breath. "I'm suggesting that maybe our weaknesses are actually strengths. Maybe the reason all those advanced civilizations failed is because they were too predictable, too organized, too much like each other. The Devourers learned how to beat them because they all responded the same way." She pulled up data showing how chaotic and unpredictable human history had been compared to what they knew about other species. "Humans are messy. We fight among ourselves. We make irrational decisions. We solve problems in ways that don't make sense to anyone else. What if that's exactly what the galaxy needs?" Dr. Chen looked skeptical. "Elena, you're talking about responding to a distress call from a civilization that's probably already gone. The signal is 4 years old by the time we receive it, and our response would take another 4 years to reach them. By then they might be gone." "Yes," Elena interrupted, "but the galaxy is listening. Every species that monitors radio signals will hear our response, and maybe, just maybe, we can inspire them to try something different this time." The debate that followed split the international community down the middle. Traditional military minds wanted to focus on building defenses and evacuation plans. Scientists pushed for rapid technological advancement. But a small group led by Elena and General Hayes proposed something that had never been attempted in the history of interstellar communication. They wanted to broadcast humanity's response to the entire galaxy, not a plea for help, not a surrender, and not a declaration of war. Instead, they would send a message that would puzzle every advanced civilization listening. "We received your distress call. We're coming to help. We might not be what you expected, but we've never been ones to abandon people in trouble." The proposal caused heated arguments in every capital city on Earth. Critics called it suicidal madness. How could a species that hadn't even managed to establish a permanent moon base promise to help aliens fighting an interstellar war? But Elena had studied enough human history to know something about her species that the critics were missing. Humans had a long tradition of doing impossible things when other people needed help. They climbed mountains to rescue strangers, sailed across oceans to fight for people they'd never met, and regularly risked their lives for causes that had no direct benefit to them. "We might not have faster-than-light travel," she argued during one particularly intense United Nations session. "We might not have planet-killing weapons or perfect unity, but we have something that apparently no other species in the galaxy has shown. We're willing to fight impossible battles for people we care about, even if we've never met them." The final vote was closer than anyone expected, by a margin of just 3 votes. The world's governments agreed to broadcast humanity's response to the Zephyrian distress call. The message would be simple, honest, and completely unprecedented in galactic history. As Elena watched the massive radio telescopes being reconfigured to send humanity's first deliberate message to alien civilizations, she wondered if they were making the biggest mistake in human history or taking the first step toward saving not just Earth, but the entire galaxy. Either way, she thought, it was going to be the most human response possible. 4 years and 2 months after Elena first detected the Zephyrian signal, humanity's response finally reached the Proxima Centauri system. During those years, Earth had continued monitoring space for any sign of what was happening to their alien neighbors. The silence had been deafening, but when their message arrived at the dying star system, something extraordinary happened that no one on Earth could have predicted. High Curator Velter had given up hope long ago. As the leader of what remained of Zephyrian civilization, he had watched 6 of their 12 worlds consumed by the Devourers. The massive harvesting ships had methodically stripped each planet of its resources, leaving behind nothing but empty rock floating in space. The surviving Zephyrians had retreated to underground cities on the remaining worlds, constantly moving to stay ahead of the consuming machines. Their beautiful crystal cities that had once reached toward the stars were now hidden beneath layers of metal and stone. Art galleries that had displayed masterpieces for millennia were now converted into survival shelters. When Velter S Communications team detected an incoming transmission from the direction of Earth, he almost didn't bother to listen. Over the centuries, they had received responses from 12 different civilizations. Each had followed the same pattern: promises of evacuation fleets, offers of new homeworlds, and detailed plans for relocating Zephyrian survivors to distant star systems. But this message was different in every possible way. The human transmission began with something no other species had ever sent: an apology. "We're sorry we can't get there faster," the message said in carefully translated Zephyrian. "We know. By the time you hear this, things have probably gotten much worse. But we want you to know that someone out here cares about what happens to you." Vilter found himself listening with growing amazement as the message continued. Instead of advanced evacuation plans or superior technology, the humans had sent something unprecedented. They had analyzed every piece of data the Zephyrians had shared about the Devourer attacks and developed new strategies for fighting them. "We've studied your battle reports," the transmission continued. "We think the Devourers have been winning because everyone fights them the same way. Every civilization tries to match their technology with better technology. Everyone tries to out-organize them with better organization. But what if you tried something completely different?" The human message included detailed tactical suggestions that were unlike anything any advanced civilization had ever proposed. Instead of massive coordinated strikes, they suggested unpredictable guerrilla attacks. Instead of trying to save entire cities, they recommended small groups using hit-and-run tactics to disrupt the Devourer's harvesting operations. But the most shocking part of the message came next. The humans weren't just sending advice, they were sending people. "We know we can't travel faster than light," the message explained. "We know our ships are primitive and our weapons are basic. But we're building a fleet anyway. By our calculations, we'll reach your system in about 35 years. We're not coming to evacuate you or to relocate you somewhere else. We're coming to fight alongside you, even if the odds are impossible." Vilter had to replay that part of the message 3 times before he believed what he was hearing. A species that had barely learned to leave their own planet was promising to travel across interstellar space to help people they had never met fight a war they couldn't possibly win. The message ended with something that brought tears to Vilter's ancient eyes. Along with their battle plans and promises of military support, the humans had sent cultural exchanges. They had included their own music, their art, their literature, and personal messages from individual humans around their planet. "We've listened to your songs," one message said. "They're beautiful, and we refuse to let them be silenced forever. We're sending you some of our music too. Maybe it will help you remember that beauty still exists in this universe, even when everything seems dark." Another message came from what appeared to be a young human child. "My teacher told me about your people. I drew you a picture of what I think your crystal cities looked like. I hope someday I can visit them and see them rebuild." Velter realized that tears were streaming down his face as he listened to message after message from individual humans, teachers, artists, engineers, farmers, and children, all sending personal notes of encouragement to aliens they would never meet. No advanced civilization had ever done anything like this. But the humans had done something else that changed everything. Their message wasn't just meant for the Zephyrians. It was being broadcast openly across the galaxy for any civilization to hear. Within months of the human transmission, something unprecedented began happening across known space. Civilizations that had been silent for centuries suddenly began broadcasting new messages. The response was unlike anything in galactic history. The Andromedans, who had previously only offered evacuation services, suddenly announced they were developing new combat strategies. The builders of Sigma Draconis, who had written off the Proxima's system is lost, began transmitting advanced weapon designs. Most surprisingly, the mysterious warrior clans of Vega, who had withdrawn from galactic affairs after losing 3-star systems to the Devourers, emerged from hiding with offers of military alliance. Elena, now directing Earth's Interstellar Communication Division, found herself overwhelmed by the flood of new signals. "It's like the whole galaxy woke up," she told Dr. Chen during one of their daily briefings. "For the first time in anyone's memory, different species are actually coordinating with each other instead of just running away or fighting alone." The most stunning development came 6 months after the human message reached Proxima Centauri. Long-range telescopes detected something that changed everything they thought. They knew about the situation. The Devourer harvesting ships had stopped their systematic consumption of the remaining Zephyrian worlds. "They're not retreating," General Hayes explained to the Emergency Council. "But they're not advancing either. It's like they're waiting for something." Dr. Chen had been analyzing the new data from multiple telescopes. The Devourers have never encountered coordinated resistance before. Every previous civilization either fled or fought alone. They might be trying to figure out how to respond to something they've never seen. Unified opposition from multiple species. The Zephyrians sent increasingly frequent updates as their situation slowly began to improve. Using human-suggested tactics, small teams of survivors had begun successfully disrupting Devourer operations. More importantly, refugee fleets from other threatened systems were beginning to arrive at Proxima Centauri, turning the dying system into an impromptu alliance. Headquarters. Elena stared at the latest transmission from Velter, hardly believing what she was reading. "They're not just surviving," she told her team. "They're actually building something." The humans gave them hope, and hope is apparently contagious. As she watched the data streams showing increased coordination between previously isolated civilizations, Elena realized that humanity's desperate promise to help strangers across the void had accomplished something no advanced species had ever managed. It had inspired the galaxy to work together. The question now wasn't whether humans could save the Zephyrians. The question was whether their simple act of caring about others had started something that might save everyone. 3 years had passed since humanity first promised to help the Zephyrians, and Earth had transformed in ways no one could have imagined. The planet that had once struggled to agree on basic environmental policies was now united behind the most ambitious project in human history. The Artemis Coalition brought together space agencies that had previously competed for funding and glory. NASA worked alongside the European Space Agency, while Russian engineers collaborated with Chinese scientists and Indian mathematicians. Countries that had been political enemies for decades suddenly found themselves sharing their most advanced technologies because they all understood one simple truth. If humanity was going to keep its promise to alien friends they had never met, everyone had to work together. Captain Maria Santos had never expected to command humanity's first interstellar war fleet. Just 5 years earlier, she had been managing routine supply missions to the International Space Station, dealing with the everyday problems of keeping astronauts alive in Earth orbit. Now she found herself preparing to lead 37 ships on a journey that would take them further from home than any human had ever traveled. The ships themselves were unlike anything Earth had ever built. The Hermes fleet, as it came to be known, represented a strange combination of human engineering and alien knowledge shared by their new galactic allies. The hulls were constructed using advanced materials whose formulas had been transmitted by the crystalline builders of Sigma Draconis. The fusion engines were based on designs shared by civilizations whose names humans couldn't even pronounce properly. But the most important components were purely human innovations. While other species have focused on building bigger weapons and stronger shields, human engineers had spent their time figuring out how to keep people alive and sane during a journey that would last 35 years. Each ship contained gardens where crew members could grow food and remember what Earth looked like. Libraries held not just technical manuals, but thousands of books, movies, and songs from every culture on Earth. Recreation areas were designed for people to play games, exercise, and socialize during the long voyage. Most importantly, each ship had communication systems that would let the crews stay in touch with their families back home, even as the distance between them grew to unimaginable proportions. The volunteers who joined the mission knew they were signing up for a one-way trip, even if they survived the battle at Proxima Centauri. They would be old men and women by the time they could possibly return to Earth. Many of them had young children, who would be middle-aged by the time their parents came home. But the applications to join the fleet outnumbered available positions by more than 100 to 1. Teachers wanted to share human knowledge with alien civilizations. Doctors hoped to learn new ways of healing from species they had only heard about in radio transmissions. Engineers were excited about the chance to work with technologies that seemed like magic. Most of all, people simply wanted to prove that humanity would keep its promises, no matter how impossible they seemed. Captain Santos spent months interviewing potential crew members, and the same theme came up again and again. My grandmother always told me to help people when they're in trouble, one applicant explained. It doesn't matter if they're neighbors or strangers from another star. If someone needs help, you help them. The launch itself became the first truly global celebration in human history. For the first time anyone could remember, every nation on Earth was united behind a single goal. Cities that had been enemies held joint viewing parties. Children who spoke different languages drew pictures of the same spaceships. Religious leaders from every faith offered blessings for a mission that transcended any earthly boundary. As the Hermes fleet departed Earth's orbit, the Zephyrians broadcast their amazement across the galaxy. They're actually doing it, Velter's transmission read. These humans, who have never traveled beyond their own moon, are crossing the void of space to fight for people they have never seen. We have lived for thousands of years, but we have never witnessed such courage. But Captain Santos knew something that even her own crew didn't fully understand. Hidden within the mission parameters was a secret plan that would either make history or get them all killed. The human fleet wasn't planning to engage the Devourers in traditional combat. Instead, they were going to attempt something that no civilization had ever tried. They were going to make first contact with humanity's greatest enemy. Dr. Chen, now serving as the fleet's senior scientist, had spent 3 years developing what he called the communication protocol, using everything they had learned about the Devourers from Zephyrian reports and galactic databases. He had created a method for attempting peaceful contact with creatures that everyone assumed were mindless destroyers. What if they're not evil? He had asked during one of the final planning sessions before launch. What if they're just following their nature, like sharks or lions? What if no one has ever tried to actually talk to them? The idea seemed insane to almost everyone who heard it. The Devourers had consumed dozens of worlds and destroyed civilizations that had existed for millennia. They were the monsters that every species in the galaxy feared. But Chen had noticed something in the data that everyone else had missed. The Devourers had never encountered unified resistance before. Every time they attacked a world, they faced either lone defenders or scattered evacuation fleets. They had never dealt with multiple species working together. Hidden in the cargo holds of the human ships were translation devices, mathematical proofs, and cultural artifacts from every civilization that had joined the growing alliance. If the Devourers were truly intelligent, these materials might provide a way to communicate. If they weren't, the fleet carried enough explosive power to ensure their defiance would be remembered. As the Hermes fleet disappeared into the darkness between stars, Earth settled in for the longest wait in human history. 35 years would pass before they learned whether humanity's greatest gamble had paid off. But Elena, now running the global communication network that kept Earth connected to its growing family of galactic allies, wasn't worried about the outcome. We did something that apparently no other species has ever done, she told reporters during one of her rare public appearances. We looked at an impossible problem and decided to try anyway. Whether we succeed or fail, we prove that humans don't abandon their friends, even when those friends live around other stars. Children who had watched the fleet launch would be adults with children of their own by the time Captain Santos reached Proxima Centauri. But across Earth, Parents told those children the same story every night, somewhere in the darkness of space. Brave humans were traveling further than anyone had ever gone, all because they had heard strangers calling for help. The message was simple, and it was purely human. When someone needs help, you help them, no matter how far you have to go or how impossible the journey seems. It was a lesson that was about to change not just human history, but the history of the entire galaxy. 34 years, 7 months, and 12 days after leaving Earth, the Hermes fleet finally arrived at Proxima Centauri. Captain Santos, now 73 years old with silver hair and laugh lines around her eyes, stood on the bridge of her flagship and stared at something no human had ever seen before. The star system looked nothing like what they had expected. According to the original Zephyrian distress call, the Devourers should have consumed everything by now. Instead, the system buzzed with activity that defied all their predictions. Massive structures orbited the remaining planets, but these weren't the harvesting ships described in the alien reports. They looked like space stations, interconnected with glowing bridges that stretched between worlds. Ships from dozens of different civilizations moved in organized patterns, carrying materials and passengers in what appeared to be the galaxy's largest construction project. Captain, called out Lieutenant Torres, the ship's communications officer who had been just 19 when they left Earth. We're receiving a transmission from the surface of Proxima B. It's in perfect English, the voice that came through their speakers was warm and familiar, though aged by decades of hardship. Welcome to Proxima Centauri, friends from Earth. This is High Curator Velter of the Zephyrian people. We have been waiting a very long time to thank you in person, Captain. Santos felt tears in her eyes as she realized what she was seeing. The Zephyrians hadn't just survived, they had thrived. More than that, they had turned their dying star system into something unprecedented in galactic history. A meeting place where dozens of species worked together as equals. Over the following days, as the human fleet was welcomed into what the aliens called the cooperative zone, the full story slowly emerged. The tactics that Earth had suggested 38 years earlier had worked better than anyone dared hope. Small teams of Zephyrian survivors had successfully disrupted enough Devourer operations to buy time for reinforcements to arrive. But the real breakthrough had come when refugee fleets from 18 different threatened civilizations had gathered at Proxima Centauri for the first time in galactic history. Multiple species had shared their technologies, their knowledge, and their resources without any thought of individual advantage. The builders had contributed their construction techniques. The warrior clans had provided military expertise. The mysterious void swimmers had emerged from dark space with technologies that bent the laws of physics. Each species had brought their greatest strengths to create something none of them could have built alone. Dr. Chen, now the fleet's senior expert on alien cultures, spent his first week in the system in a state of constant amazement. It's like every species finally remembered that they're stronger together than apart. He told Captain Santos during one of their daily briefings. The humans gave them permission to hope, and hope apparently builds things. But the most shocking revelation came when they finally learned the truth about the Devourers themselves. The massive creatures that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia weren't the mindless destroyers. Everyone had believed them to be. It had taken 6 months of careful communication, using translation protocols developed during the long journey from Earth. But Dr. Chen and his team had achieved the impossible. They had established meaningful contact with the Devourer collective intelligence. The truth was both simpler and more complex than anyone had imagined. The Devourers were ancient beings whose reproduction cycle required the consumption of planetary resources for millions of years. They had followed the same pattern: find a world with the materials their offspring needed, consume it completely, and move on to the next system. They never meant to cause extinction, Dr. Chen explained to the assembled representatives from 43 different species. To them, planets were just resources, like trees are to a beaver building a dam. They had no concept that other intelligent beings might have emotional attachments to their homeworlds. The breakthrough came when the human team presented the Devourers with mathematical proofs showing the advantages of sustainable resource management over total consumption. Using examples from Earth's own environmental struggles, they demonstrated how cooperation between species could provide the materials the Devourers needed without destroying entire civilizations. The negotiations had been unlike anything in galactic history. Representatives from species that had been enemies for centuries sat at the same table with creatures that had consumed their worlds, humans. The youngest and supposedly most primitive species present served as mediators between beings whose technologies and lifespans dwarfed their own. The peace treaty that emerged was revolutionary. The Devourers agreed to establish protected zones for developing civilizations and to work with established species to harvest resources from uninhabited worlds and asteroid fields. In exchange, the galactic community would help provide materials for Devourer reproduction cycles and assist in establishing nursery systems where their offspring could develop without threatening other civilizations. Most importantly, the treaty established integration protocols that would allow young Devourers to learn about galactic civilization and choose whether to join the cooperative community or continue their traditional nomadic lifestyle among the stars. Captain Santos found herself signing humanity's name to a document that established Earth as the diplomatic capital of what historians would later call the Galactic Cooperative Era. It wasn't because humans were the most advanced or the most powerful species. It was because they had been the first to suggest that problems might be solved by talking rather than fighting. The return journey to Earth took another 35 years. But this time the human fleet wasn't traveling alone. Ships from dozens of species accompanied them, carrying technologies, knowledge, and most importantly, new friends who were eager to visit the world that had taught the galaxy how to work together. When Captain Santos, now well over 100 years old but kept healthy by alien medical technologies, finally returned to Earth orbit, she found a planet that had spent 70 years preparing for war but had instead become the center of the galaxy's first lasting PACE. Dr. Elena Vasquez, now ancient but still sharp as ever, met the returning fleet at the orbital station that had grown into a small city. During their absence, "Welcome home," she said to Santos during their first face-to-face meeting in decades. "I hope you're ready for visitors. Half the galaxy wants to come see the world that started all this." The final entry in Captain Santos's mission log was simple, but heartfelt. Mission accomplished. We promise to help strangers in need. And somehow that simple promise taught the entire universe that most problems can be solved if you care enough to try. Earth's first monument to interstellar cooperation was built on the same Chilean mountaintop where Elena had first detected the Zephyrian distress call. The inscription, written in the languages of 43 different species, carried a message that had become humanity's gift to the galaxy. When someone calls for help, you answer. It doesn't matter how far away they are or how impossible the situation seems. You answer, and you keep trying until you find a way to help. The Proxima incident, as historians called it, had begun with a cry for help from across the stars. It ended with the realization that the universe was full of people who just needed someone to show them that working together was possible. Humanity had done exactly that, in the most human way imaginable, by refusing to give up on strangers who needed help.